Before anything else, the crux of the build is playing with the handguns while keeping Sandevistan up, and from time to time use the optical camo to avoid enemy damage as much as possible. Further improving our damage output is the Merciless perk. We grab perks to help us with the leveling, and as we reach our final setup, we respec and dump all our points on Merciless. This build video is the updated version of my handguns build called the legendary Rockerboy. Check that video out if you haven't already, link in the description. Now, let's start off with our starting attributes. Let's max out reflexes first, then 1 point each to tech and cool. 6 points on reflexes will give us the opportunity to max it out to 20 if you choose to focus on this attribute. We'll have 5 on technical ability so that we can grab the true craftsman perk. In that way, we'll be able to craft rare items as we are leveling. The overall theme of the build is the Rockerboy role, mainly inspired by the game's prominent character Johnny Silverhand. Here are the sliders for my V. And here are the female sliders as well. Moving on to the distribution, we have 3 options to go for depending on our preference. Option 1 is my preferred way of leveling up. The idea here is to alternate between cool and reflexes, allowing us to level up our cold blood tree from the very beginning. This build works wonders with this capstone perk, Merciless, so being able to gain cold blood experience from the very beginning will naturally progress the skill tree as we play along the story. From level 1 to 31, alternate points between cool and reflexes, then at some point when you reach 45 street cred, put 1 point on body. We'll grab the legendary gorilla arms along the way, allowing us to bypass the 10 body requirement on a couple of weapons, namely the Burya and the Comrade's Hammer. For the late game, we spend points on technical ability up to 18 for the crafting perk Edge Runner Artisan to be able to craft legendary iconic weapons. We'll have a good amount of iconic handguns to choose from. We'll talk about them later in the video. We'll spend the rest of our attribute points on body to improve survivability. For option 2, instead of alternating reflexes and cool, we'll go back and forth between reflexes and technical ability. With this setup, we'll have access to craftable weapons as we're leveling, and around level 30, we would already have the ability to craft legendary items and iconic weapons. Same thing with option 1, as soon as you get 45 street cred, spend a point on body. Remember to stop at 18 tech, then max out cool, and spend the last points on body. At level 50, this is how our attributes will look like. With a maxed out reflexes, supplemented by a maxed out cool, we can go throughout the game guns blazing with different handguns in our arsenal. And to even expand our arsenal, we have 18 technical ability, allowing us to craft iconic handguns and other legendary essentials. For the handguns perk tree, it's pretty straightforward. Just focus on any perk that would improve our handgun's immediate DPS. There are some notable perks here that are a must, so be sure to take them as soon as they're available. One is the Gunslinger perk, which will reduce our reload time by 25%. Very useful, especially on handguns with low mag size like revolvers, and specifically the iconic weapon Comrade's Hammer. Speaking of which, Grand Finale will have the last round on your gun deal double damage. It is a good way to boost the damage output per mag. Having this perk along with the Comrade's Hammer, a revolver that only consists of 1 round per cylinder, is pretty much worth it for that reason alone. Since we're going to be focusing on improving our crit stats, it's important to take High Noon, which will increase our handgun's crit chance by 6%, a fistful of Euro dollars, which will boost our crit damage by 30%. And Brain Power, which will increase our crit chance by 7% for 5 seconds whenever we score headshots, so be sure to prioritize clicking the bad guys' heads. When we reach skill level 20 for handguns, you'll unlock the capstone perk The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which will boost damage and armor at its base level by 30% whenever you deal critical hits. You can then further improve the perk by perpetually spending spare points on it. To further improve our weapon damage output, we'll move on to our technical ability skill trees. With the engineering perk, we'll grab a few perks here that will improve our damage when using tech weapons. But there is one perk here that we should take note of. Play the Angles will increase ricochet damage by 50%. Another aspect of this build is that we can fully utilize bullet ricochets. Depending on the muzzle brake that we'll be using, we can deal additional damage just by bouncing your shots off the ground. We'll discuss more later in the video. For the crafting tree, grabbing the 4 primary crafting perks is definitely the way to go, but also perks that would further improve it in various aspects, such as obtaining more components, chance for free upgrades and crafting, and component cost reduction. Of course, you would need True Craftsman, Grease Monkey, and Edge Runner Artisan, which will allow us to craft legendary items and iconic weapons. A couple notable perks here are Field Technician, which will increase the damage of any crafted weapons by 10%. Now, the way this works is that as soon as you obtain this perk, any crafted weapon that you have in your inventory will have their damage boosted. Tune-Up, which will allow us to craft components to their higher quality variant, which in turn give us crafting experience. It is important to level our crafting skill because it will give us the ability to craft legendary mods. At crafting level 18, we'll be able to craft legendary mods such as the Armadillo, Crunch, Heat Sinks, and more. One way to level up crafting is to keep buying out components from any gun vendors, then advancing time by 24 hours. Keep doing this as much as you can. We can then keep crafting higher quality components until we reach level 18 in crafting. Moving on to Cold Blood, with the Cold Blood perk itself, along with the other perks that are connected to it, we'll gain different buffs that will supplement all of our offensive and defensive capabilities. As long as we keep our stacks of Cold Blood, we'll sustain these buffs for as long as we can. With Coagulant, our stacks of Cold Blood will expire one by one instead of everything altogether. And with Critical Condition, we'll further prolong our stacks by increasing its duration by 50%. Cold and Calculating will give us a 50% chance to gain stacks when dealing critical hits, another way of getting Cold Blood stacks. And finally, for more stacks of Cold Blood, Coldest Blood will increase our max stack amount to 5. A few perks that we need here over at the Ninjutsu tree, we're gonna grab sneaking bonuses that will provide us more damage while in stealth, as well as improving stealth itself. Make sure to max out From the Shadows for that huge 20% crit chance boost for 7 seconds as soon as you enter combat, perfect for when initiating an encounter. And spend a point on aggressive antitoxins for poison immunity. For athletics, we don't really need anything here except spending a single point on Epimorphosis to have health regen to 100% when outside combat. You may max out Wolverine to improve survivability overall. Now, remember that due to the recent patches in the game, armor stacking is not as viable as before. In the current version of the game, unless we invest heavily in the body attribute, we won't be able to tank damage while we gun down enemies like we did before the nerfs. And add to that, most enemies in the late game are now equipped with guns like the Overture or the Niue, which can chip a significant amount of health and can pretty much flatline us in just a few shots. Very dangerous, especially if we're playing on the hardest difficulty. Like seriously, everyone has this revolver, it's insane, look at that damage. And so, here are the perks that can give us an edge and be able to survive the onslaught of these heavy hitters. Defensive Clotting from Cold Blood will increase our armor by 8% per stack of Cold Blood. Another perk from the Cold Blood tree, Blood Swell, a life-saving perk, in which upon receiving lethal damage while Cold Blood is active, will consume all stacks while restoring 10% health per stack and will grant us with damage immunity for 5 seconds. Combining this with Cheat Death from Ninjutsu, when our health drops below 50%, this perk will give us 50% damage reduction for 10 seconds. And then lastly, we'll close off the segment with this incredible perk, Merciless. When you max out your Cold Blood progression, you'll be able to unlock this capstone perk that gives us 1% crit chance and 25% crit damage, and for every perk level increases them by 1% and 3% respectively. This will effectively boost our damage output with constant critical hits, supplementing all of our offensive handguns perks, so be sure to spend all of your spare points in this one. First, let's talk about the different weapons that we'll be using for the build, what they can do, and how they can impact our playthrough. We'll be foregoing smart weapons entirely because of the ballistic co-processor Cyberware. We want to utilize the ricochet mechanic because it can really boost our damage output with the muzzle brakes that we'll be talking about later. Let's start with the non-iconics. First off is the standard Malorian Overture. We'll be using this for the entire leveling process, both for combat and stealth. Always have all of its damage types in your inventory to take advantage of enemy vulnerabilities at any time. Next is the Boria, another high damage dealing revolver. We'll be using this alongside our Overture while leveling. Remember that this revolver has a body requirement of 10, so be sure to spend a point on our body attribute as soon as you attain 45 street cred. This will allow us to buy the legendary Gorilla Arms, which will add 6 points to body and thus be able to meet the requirement on the weapon. And lastly, the Quasar, a very powerful revolver when fired in auto mode. Shots from the auto fire are full charged rounds, so any perks from the engineering tree that benefits charge shots guarantee this weapon as a must-have. This gun is a little tricky to use because of its intense recoil. Make sure to grab these perks to mitigate them significantly. Also, using this along the feedback circuit Cyberware will constantly restore our health every time we hit an enemy. Now, let's move on to the iconics. This is quite the long list, so we'll be delving into the ones that are highly recommended, then take a quick look at other options. First on the list is the Archangel, obtainable during the mission A Like Supreme. It'll be quite a while until we get this. Finish the main quest line as soon as you can to be able to complete Carrie Eurodyne's storyline. This revolver is an iconic variant of the Overture with unique properties. It's always electrical and it has better recoil and status effect chance than a regular Overture. You may use this for both combat and stealth. By the way, I'd also like to mention that I personally like to call this Carrie's Malorian as an opposite to Johnny's Malorian. The Overture revolver is a product of the weapons manufacturer Malorian Arms and has been the preferred firearms of well-known people of the past like Morgan Blackhand and Johnny Silverhand, and of the present, which leads us to Crash. It is Riverward's own Overture, obtainable during following the river. This one's special property is that it has auto mode activated after a short charge by holding the trigger. Stat-wise, compared to the regular Overture, it has reduced recoil and bullet spread, but at the cost of reduced fire rate. Since this is a power weapon, any perk or cyberware that would benefit fully charged tech weapons will not work, so keep that in mind. Nonetheless, it is an amazing weapon with high damage output. Lizzie is a tech weapon and is the iconic variant of the Omaha, obtainable during the mission Automatic Love. While the Omaha only fires 3 projectiles per shot, the Lizzie fires 4, not to mention the incredibly high fire rate this handgun has. When fully charged, it rapid fires 5 shots as opposed to the Omaha's 3. Once again, you can manage the recoil when you have the right perks, making that charge shot significantly stable. And if you want another multi-projectile shooting gun, Doom Doom is an iconic variant of the Nova, which can only be obtained by not having the Militech chip and then paying the 10,000 euro dollars to Royce out of your own pocket during the mission, The Pickup. It can then be looted later from Dum Dum during the mission Second Conflict. Initiate a gunfight, wait for Dum Dum to pull out his gun, then take him out. Doom Doom fires 4 rounds per shot, considerably better damage than the regular Nova, also better fire rate, but at the cost of high recoil and bullet spread. The Dying Knight is an auto pistol that is the iconic variant of the Lexington, obtainable at the beginning of Act 1. It's a decent starter weapon during the early game. If we want fully automatic, this is the gun we need. It has additional headshot damage and a faster reload compared to the Lexington. A very nice trick that I do with this pistol is I have a silencer attached to it, activates Endeviston plus camo, and headshot every gonk in the room while maintaining stealth status. Very fun to use and very powerful all around. The Comrade's Hammer is the supercharged version of the Burya, both perfect and flawed. It can one-hit kill most enemies in any given situation provided that you have the Grand Finale perk that causes area damage upon impact and additional burn chance to boot. All of these good things are countered by its short range and very slow reload. The 1-round mag capacity may be seen as a trade-off, but with a Grand Finale perk, each shot from this monster will always deal double damage. It may not be to everyone's taste because of the slow reload, but a bit of time slowdown is usually a good workaround. In order to get the crafting spec for this gun, complete the NCPD hustle here in Arroyo. When it comes to muzzles, obviously, if we're planning to go stealth during an encounter, attach an Electo to one of our guns. Reserve a slot for our handguns specifically for stealthy situations. We would want to have it on our overtures or their iconic variants. For muzzle brakes, they're available at Wilson shops at some point during Act 1. The Liger flat out increases the damage of any handguns that is attached to, so if you want to actually aim, we definitely want to go for this one. Babaroga gives the most ricochet damage out of all the muzzle brakes in the game. Attach this to any of our handguns used for combat, aim at the floor, and let the trick shots do the work. Keep in mind though that not all surfaces are ricochetable, and ricocheting while in Sandevistan won't usually have the shots tracked to the enemies after bouncing off the surface. Now that we've discussed muzzles, let's talk about other handguns that we may want to use from time to time. The Lachingona Dorada is Jackie's new. It has faster reload than the regular one, it's always thermal, and can be obtained after the mission heroes. Get it at Mama Wells's bar, located right here. Death and Taxis is another new. It is always electrical and fires 2 projectiles per shot. Can be found during the mission X Factor. Grab the gun at Maiko's office here. First off of our Liberty handguns collection, the Congo can be found during the mission The Heist, located at Yorinobu's penthouse over here. It has increased fire rate and reduced recoil than a regular Liberty. Plan B can be found at the Badlands here, right over at this dead body. It has increased bleeding chance and it doesn't use pistol ammo but instead uses your own money. The Seraph is rewarded to you by Padre after completing every one of his gigs in Haywood. Go to your stash to receive the handgun. It is always thermal, so it causes burn status to our enemies, and while they're on fire, we inflict additional damage to them. Pride is Rogue's Liberty. It can be obtained after choosing and completing Rogue's ending. Don't upgrade the weapon during the final mission, and upon reloading the point of no return save, we'll have the gun in our inventory. It has increased crit chance, increased headshot damage, and a small chance to apply stun. For more Malorian handguns, the iconic Overture Amnesty is another weapon that can be obtained after beating the game. This time though, we have to choose and complete Panam's ending. Again, don't upgrade this gun during that final mission, and upon returning to the point of no return save, we'll have the gun in the inventory. This Overture may not be as powerful as the regular one, but it has the highest fire rate out of all of them. And finally, Johnny's Malorian. Not really mind-blowing stat-wise, but it has unique reload animation, a special quick melee attack, and it's cool as hell. Having multiple points on Merciless will give this gun a decent edge against most enemies. But otherwise, only use this just for the fashion of it. Can be obtained during the mission Chippin In. For weapon mods, we only want Crunch, which will increase weapon damage based on the mod's rarity. We may go for crit boosting mods like the Pacifier or the Penetrator, but we'd rather go for the mod that would give us raw damage. We'll boost our crit stats from other areas such as perks and cyberware. The crafting spec for Crunch is available at gun vendors. As for clothing, don any legendary clothing on all of our slots. There are hidden legendary clothing scattered throughout Night City. Save and reload before looting. We can roll for either mod slots only or roll for 4% crit damage property. For the head, face, and feet clothing, we can only have either the 4% crit damage stat or a single mod slot. For the face clothing, we want to roll for the mod slot because we'll be attaching clothing mods here that are only exclusive to face clothing. As for the outer and inner torso and legs clothing, we may have them with up to 2 mod slots or 1 mod slot with the 4% crit damage boost. As for the wardrobe, any street punk look will do as long as you layer it with Johnny's jacket. For clothing mods, we may either have the Fortuna, which will increase our crit chance by 4%, or the Bully, which will boost our crit damage by 8%. Again, these are only exclusive to face clothing. We may acquire these in the open world, or if you happen to find a piece of clothing with these mods attached to them, you may extract them out as long as you have the perk Waste Not, Want Not. And then of course, the Armadillo mod, which will increase our armor depending on its rarity. In our case, since we can have up to 18 crafting skill levels, we may craft ourselves our very own legendary armadillos. The crafting spec for this mod can be found in the open world, so look out for containers you may find during your playthrough. Further boosting our damage output is with the Kiroshi Optics with 3 mod slots. We have a couple of options with this. We may slot in 3 Trajectory Analysis to increase headshot damage with your guns by a total of 75%, or by slotting in 3 Weak Spot Detection to increase our crit chance by a total of 6%. Having 3 of the same Kiroshi mods will stack and will reflect on our numbers. The legendary Ballistic Coprocessor is completely necessary to fully utilize the ricochet mechanic. It gives an additional 50% ricochet damage, and it also increases the chance for bullets to ricochet on top of the given percent chance for muzzle breaks. The optical camo can be used not only for stealth, but also a good way to avoid damage while in combat. If we're utilizing ricochets, going camo will definitely help us find good angles to bounce our bullets. For constant healing using tech weapons, the feedback circuit will restore 10% health when you hit enemies after discharging a fully charged weapon. During the gear section earlier, we've seen how very beneficial this is, especially with weapons like the Lizzie and the Quasar. As for the Gorilla Arms, getting the legendary variant while leveling will allow us to equip the Boria or the Comrade's Hammer. It's not entirely important during the late game, but it will totally help when you eventually complete Beat on the Brat missions. Then, for our time dilation ability, the Chantis and Devistan Mark IV should be our go-to, mainly because of the short cooldown. This one's available at the Jig Jig Street Ripper Dock, also known as Fingers. Using the Sendevistan ability is a great way to survive incoming damage. As explained earlier, enemies will tend to have high damage dealing guns at their disposal. They would have Overtures, News, Novas, and when they're firing with rifles, they would tend to have Ajaxes and Masamunes, all guns that will chip a big amount of health if we're not careful, and then of course, if we are playing on very hard. The time slowdown offers very fun ways to eliminate enemies, so use it as much as you can. And when it comes to its mods, you want to stack 3 heat sinks to further reduce its cooldown, so we could keep its uptime for as long as forever. You can buy the crafting spec of the heat sink at the Arroyo Ripper Dock, and when we're at crafting level 18, we'll be able to craft the legendary variants. Now for this segment, we're just gonna go for a list of quick tips on how to level our V. It's not my usual way by dividing it into 2 sections, but I hope these strategies may help you out during the early game and the rest of the playthrough itself. As soon as you start the first act, head to Wilson's shop and get yourself the Dying Knight. This one's a little weak in this state, but it will get the job done. Save up money by doing NCPD hustles around Kabuki and by selling loot to vendors. Once you save up around 10,000 euro dollars, you can buy an uncommon overture spec from gun vendors. Make sure you have enough for a silencer as well. Now that you have an overture with a silencer, grab these perks to further improve your damage. Also, be sure to have Cold Blood maxed out already if we want to gain skill progression as we're playing the game as opposed to grinding for it later on. During the early game, stealth is the way to go. Use your silence overture to eliminate enemies during NCPD hustles and gigs. If you find yourself in combat situations, a flashbang will come in handy. We can find a crafting spec at this NCPD hustle. At some point during Act 1, you'll have enough cash to pay Victor's debt. By doing so, we'll unlock his shop and be able to buy a 3-slot Karoshi. Head over to the Trade tab and grab a Trajectory Analysis, advance the time by 24 hours, then buy them again. Do that again for a third time. Equip the Karoshi and slot in the 3 mods for that sweet 75% headshot damage boost. As for clothing, you have the whole of Watson, which consists of legendary clothing and hidden locations. Here are the locations. Now before looting them, save and reload until they roll with stats that would increase our damage against enemies that are moderate threat and high threat. These are enemies that are pretty much higher level than us and would provide an advantage damage-wise. These stats stacked together would significantly help us as we're leveling up in the early game. North side enemies are quite tanky, so take your time rolling for these properties. As soon as we reach 15 reflexes, we may now get ourselves the Chantis and Devistan Mark IV, so at that point, take advantage of this ability whenever possible. As mentioned earlier, when we reach 45 street cred, raise our body attribute to bring it to 4. Then, buy the legendary gorilla arms from any Reaper dogs at either Haywood or the city center. This will allow us to equip a Boria and the Comrade's Hammer. For our weapons, during the main game, we can grab ourselves some overtures and a rare crafting spec for the Boria at the gun vendor here in Arroyo. During the mission Automatic Love, we can grab the Lizzie over here. And when we have invested enough perk points into the engineering skill, we may grab a rare crafting spec for the Quasar over here at Pacifica. For our armor, once we find a crafting spec for the armadillo, we can just focus on stacking armor by buying clothing with max mod slots, then attaching our crafted armadillos. You may still use the legendary clothing that we have during the early game if you want to stick with the mod threat high threat bonuses. But remember, enemies on very hard will increasingly deal very high damage and may one-shot us if we are not careful. And lastly, I made a Google Sheet on where to find the items that are featured in this video, including legendary clothing that can be found all throughout Night City, link in the description. Thanks for watching. Check out my other build videos in the channel and be sure to subscribe to stay tuned for more build videos in the future.